What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Happy New Year. It is the first video back of 2025, and today we're going to be talking about over 60 players that I'm evaluating going into the offseason that are going into their second year. So all of these players were drafted in the 2024 rookie class. We're going to be talking about who I am comfortable keeping on my roster this offseason, who may be on the fringe, maybe on the roster bubble for our Dynasty fantasy football teams, and who I'm comfortable cutting going into 2025. So without wasting any more time, let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about these players. All right, so for today's video, we are going to be looking at this from your standard 12-team super flex tight end premium type of league. This is a very standard format. So if you do play in a 10-team league, maybe you play in an 8-man, a 14-man league, you are going to have to adjust your expectations, but this will be from that 12-team super flex PPR start 10 type of league format. And additionally, we're only going to be talking about the running back and the wide receiver position, your quarterbacks and your tight ends. We're not going to be talking about those in today's video. We will talk about those later this week, but today it is just the running backs and the wide receivers. So I'm going to move over to this side of the screen because we're going to have a lot of graphics in today's video, but let's talk about those easy keeps. I got a lot of players on this list, some of those guys being Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., Marvin Harrison Jr. Look, the reason why these guys are all easy keeps is either because of draft capital or production. Obviously, you're not really thinking about a lot of these guys as cuts. All of these guys we're more than comfortable with. Ladd McConkey, good performer. Bucky Irving, good performer. Romo Dunze, high draft capital, maybe not the best performer, but you're not cutting Romo Dunze. These are the very easy ones for me. We're not overthinking this. Obviously, you're not cutting these guys. You're not dropping these guys. So make sure these guys are the easy keeps going into the next offseason. But now that we've got the easy ones out of the way, let's move on to the fringe wide receivers, players that may be on the roster bubble. And the first player we're going to talk about in today's video is going to be Adonai Mitchell for the Indianapolis Colts. And look, this is a player who finished the season with 23 catches. He only had 312 yards on 55 targets. He did play the majority of the year as the wide receiver 4, mostly behind Michael Pittman Jr., Alec Pierce, and Josh Downs. Now, this is a guy who did get second round draft capital. To me, I have a lot of good memories of the good college tape. He was a player that I really liked coming into the year. So because of that, I'm not ready to give up. I think the draft capital, I think the talent of Adonai Mitchell are good enough. This is a keep for me going into 2025. Now, the next player we'll talk about is Jalen Coker. Jalen Coker, this is a player who took over as the wide receiver 3 in this offense. He played behind Adam Thielen and Xavier Legette. He finished second among rookie wide receivers this year in yards per route run versus man coverage. Now, that was only behind Ladd McConkey, so a very good year from Jalen Coker. He was a dynasty gem. A lot of people liked him as a sleeper in the draft. Now, you look at Carolina, and this is probably a team that could go find another wide receiver to add to the offense this offseason, but I do think Coker showed enough flashes. I do think he's a strong keep candidate going into year 2. Moving on to the next player, Troy Franklin of the Denver Broncos. If you guys have been around the channel, you know I really liked Troy's tape coming out of college. The draft capital, it didn't match my evaluation, but it was something that kind of was a red flag. I did like that. Like I said, going into this year, I thought there was a chance that he could succeed reuniting with Bo Nix in Denver in a murky wide receiver room that really didn't have a lot of talent behind a guy in Corley Sutton. The problem was this year, Troy Franklin, he was outsnapped by Lil Jordan Humphrey and Devaughn Vele for the majority of the year. Vele obviously being a rookie as well. And not to mention, 11 of his 16 games this year, Troy Franklin finished outside of the top 75 wide receivers on the week. So although I am going to be holding on to my rosters, maybe confirmation bias, maybe those pre-draft biases that I'm holding on to, as much as it hurts me, he's probably a player that leans closer to the drop side of things than he does actually the keep side of things. But for me, like I said, I'm probably going to be holding only because I really like the kid coming out of college. Now let's move on to our next player. We're going to talk about another guy who had a disappointing year, Jalen Polk for the New England Patriots. I didn't love the tape of Jalen Polk pre-draft coming into the NFL, but he did get second round draft capital and it did have me questioning my evaluation. Now, 12 catches as a rookie and primarily operating as the wide receiver 4 all year behind guys like Kayshon Boutte, Kendrick Bourne. It's not a good look for a guy like Jalen Polk. The draft capital will probably be the only thing that gets people reluctant to drop him at this point, but I do expect the Patriots to probably bring in another wide receiver this offseason, whether that be via the NFL draft or free agency. We've talked about on this channel, maybe Tet being a good fit, Tet McMillan of Arizona, maybe being a good fit for the Patriots, maybe T. Higgins if he hits the open market. We don't know what happens, but at the end of the year, I'm not feeling very comfortable with Jalen Polk, and a new coaching staff probably limits the upside of Polk, even if he fixes things. If you're leaning on the drop or keep category, I'm still kind of on the fence. The draft draft capital makes me want to keep him, but the play and the situation probably leans a little bit closer to a drop, in my opinion. Let's move on to our next wide receiver. We're going to talk about Luke McCaffrey of the Washington Commanders. Now, Luke, he was another wide receiver that got day 2 draft capital, and many people were excited about him due to the lack of solidified options behind Terry McLaurin. But as a rookie, Luke, he did finish 5th in total snaps for the Commanders behind guys like Noah Brown, De'Ami Brown, Olamide Zaccheaus. All of these guys played ahead of Luke McCaffrey in his rookie season. Now, in all reality, he probably is a guy that you can drop safely if you need space. He really did just operate as a kick returner for the majority of the year. But all of those guys that I mentioned, Zaccheaus, De'Ami Brown, Noah Brown, they're all free agents going into the offseason. So if you want to hold Luke McCaffrey in the off chance that maybe a couple of those guys walk and he by default moves up the depth chart and maybe takes the second year leap, I think you can hold on to him. But for me, I'm probably going to lean keep just because of the free agency stuff, but he really didn't do too much as a rookie that makes you feel super comfortable in the talent of Luke McCaffrey. The next player on this list is going to be Jermaine Burton of the Cincinnati Bengals. Talk about a rough rookie season. I'm still going to lean to keep Jermaine, and let me tell you why. He has a ton of talent. A lot of the problems with Jermaine Burton were kind of red flags off of the field coming into the NFL. That was on his draft profile. That's why he went in the 3rd round, because a lot of evaluators viewed him as a first-round talent. He's dominated at programs like Georgia, Alabama, a lot of good college programs. He just wasn't really ready off of the field. He's a little bit immature. Now, as a rookie, Burton, he was suspended for sleeping in, showed up to a game in pajamas. He had multiple healthy scratches for the Bengals. He just couldn't get on the field enough to pass wide receiver 3 Andrei Iosivas on the depth chart. So for me, obviously those red flags, that is very, very concerning for Jermaine Burton, but a lot of the upside of Burton rests in the hands of T. Higgins this offseason and the future of his free agency decision. If T decides to walk, I would assume Burton would at least get some more opportunities to maybe make the most of his reps here this offseason. Like I said though, he may just never get out of his own way. He could maybe become the next Kadarius Toney, one of those guys that just is too much of a headache to keep around on an NFL roster, despite him being very talented, but the talent's too good for me to cut at the moment. I'm going to hold Jermaine Burton and keep him on my roster this offseason. Going on to our next wide receiver, I'm going to talk about Roman Wilson, and this is another wide receiver that really didn't get on the field a lot this year. His entire rookie year was virtually lost due to an injury, so it's really hard to take anything away from this other than we just need to be patient and wait and see what he does in year 2, which will mainly be his rookie year if you're looking at it from a playing standpoint. It's no secret that Pittsburgh, they do have a need for an additional wide receiver. They added guys in season like Mike Williams to come in and help, and Van Jefferson obviously was another guy that they went out and got in the offseason. Both of those guys are going to be unrestricted free agents this offseason, so I would be holding on to Roman Wilson because of the draft capital, because of the opportunities ahead of him. Maybe he gets into that wide receiver 2 role like many had hoped he would going into his rookie season. Now, my next wide receiver is going to be Devaughn Vele of the Denver Broncos. We talked about Troy Franklin. Let's talk about his teammate. Devaughn, he worked his way up the depth chart. He got to the wide receiver 2 role in this Broncos offense this year behind Courtland Sutton. Now, is he going to be a guy that I think becomes an every week starter for your fantasy football teams? Probably not, but I could see him becoming a guy like DJ Shark, who did have a couple decent seasons for the Jaguars before they did find an eventual upgrade at the wide receiver position. That said, currently at the time, I do feel more confident in Devaughn Vele than I do in his teammate Troy Franklin, and that's something I never thought I'd be saying 6 months ago. So for now, we're going to be keeping Devaughn Vele on our Dynasty fantasy football teams, and maybe even prioritizing keeping him over his teammate in Troy Franklin. Now, our next wide receiver is going to be Malik Washington of the Miami Dolphins. This is a player that I'm keeping going into the offseason as well. He worked himself up into that wide receiver 3 job pretty quickly in Miami, and he did see his snap shares go up as the season went on. Now, he's a player that I felt like was a decent flyer option in drafts last year, and so far he's done enough to keep me interested going into year 2. If Tyreek Hill's recent interview about wanting to leave Miami has any truth to it, that could open a big door of opportunity for Malik Washington going into his second season. So this offseason, I'll be keeping him as a stash just in case the Miami Dolphins decide to move on from Tyreek Hill. Let's talk Jordan Whittington of the Los Angeles Rams. I think Whittington is a very solid wide receiver who did a nice job filling in nicely for the Rams earlier this year when they were dealing with some Puka Nacua and some Cooper Kupp injuries. However, as the year went on, the Rams, they got healthier, and he saw his snap share decrease significantly, resulting in 8 straight weeks of wide receiver 100 or worse finishes from weeks 10 to 17. That said, I do think he did enough when he was given the opportunity to keep me interested, but he's a player that I'm still slightly slightly on the fence about. If you need to open some bench space, I think I'm okay with you cutting Jordan Whittington, just because I don't see a lot of opportunity for him unless there are multiple injuries like there was last year. But as far as long-term opportunities go, Kupp is getting a little bit older, so maybe you could make an argument for that. But at the end of the day, so is Matthew Stafford, and I don't know if we want Jordan Whittington if Matthew Stafford is not in Los Angeles. So because of that, I think you could go either way. For me, I'm going to lean towards keeping, but you could drop him probably pretty safely as well. Let's move on to Javon Baker for the New England Patriots as well. This is another player that a lot of people liked in the offseason. Just like Jalen Polk, Javon Baker, he was unable to find a role with the Patriots this year as a rookie. He only saw 90 total snaps on the year, which almost half of which came in a meaningless Week 18 game for the Patriots. Now, although Baker, he was a dynasty darling, like I said, in the draft process, and he was a late round favorite for many fantasy football managers, he's done nothing to make you feel good about him here at the next level. We may be getting out a little bit too early on Javon Baker as a player, but I'm comfortable dropping him if you need to make space on your roster here this offseason. And now my last wide receiver I want to talk about, it is going to be Malachi Corley of the New York Jets. Now, this is a guy that I think we can drop as well. He was a raw wide receiver prospect coming into the NFL draft, and I felt like if he landed in the right scenario, he could pop off. However, the Jets, they proved that they just weren't the right fit for Malachi Corley. He's been healthy scratched more than once this season, and he has struggled to find playing time, finishing 5th overall in total snaps on the Jets behind both Allen Lazard and Xavier Gibson. Now, like I said, I think you can drop him. He is a day 2 pick that I'm a little bit nervous about, maybe just because of my priors, but just like Jalen Polk and Troy Franklin, all of the signs on the field and coming out of the media does feel like these guys are probably drop candidates if you do need the space. So all of those guys were probably on the fence for me. They were on the roster bubble, definitely worth a discussion. These players are all very easy drops for me at the wide receiver position. If you need roster space, you can safely drop every single one of these players on this list. Jacob Cowing, Bub Means, Tez Walker, the list goes on and on. I'm not going to talk about each and every one of these guys or even name every one of these guys, but all of them are safely droppable, especially if we're making roster decisions on the guys that we just talked about. I'd prioritize all of those guys over these ones if you had to make those decisions. So if you need the space, you can safely drop these guys. But let's move on to the running backs. The first running back I want to talk about is going to be Blake Corum of the Los Angeles Rams. It's not as easy of a decision as a guy like Tyrone Tracy. However, Blake Corum, this is a guy we're definitely keeping right now. He didn't overtake Kyren Williams this year, and it did actually feel eerily similar kind of to that Tank Bigsby rookie season, where a lot of people felt like he was going to affect Travis Etienne, and then he didn't. And then going into year 2, we all kind of know what happened with Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby. This feels very much like the same situation. He did finish 2nd overall in snaps for the Rams at the running back position, so he did operate as the backup the majority of the year. I'm still going to be holding on to Blake Corum. He is a talented running back handcuff. He does have good draft capital, especially if I have Kyren Williams. And it is unfortunate that he's going to finish the year on IR. You're not going to get to see him play in a playoff game, but this is a strong keep at the running back position going into year 2. Don't overthink Blake Corum. Now let's move on to Isaac Guerendo. Isaac Guerendo, he's another keep at the running back position. He did fill in nicely as a starter for a short period of time for the Niners. Obviously this year when Jordan Mason and Christian McCaffrey were both shut down at the end of the year. Unfortunately, Guerendo, he also dealt with an injury himself that did force him to miss some time, but he did look good enough as a starter in that time that I do think he's going to go into next year as the primary handcuff. You also look at both Elijah Mitchell and Jordan Mason. They are scheduled to be unrestricted free agents, so it should just be CMC and Isaac Guerendo for the Niners next year. We've seen that over the years, these San Francisco running backs, they're valuable in some capacity, but I do think with his opportunity likely increasing in year 2, Isaac Guerendo should be a strong keep. Let's move on to Jalen Wright of the Miami Dolphins. Jalen Wright's another running back that I'm keeping. He operated as the RB3 this year behind both Devaughn Achane and Raheem Mostert, and he never really saw enough work to truly see his potential. However, Raheem Mostert is going to be 33 years old next year, and that is ancient for running backs at the NFL level, so I do expect Jalen Wright to be the long-term plan still as the running back 2 behind Devaughn Achane. And let's not forget that Achane does benefit from being in a dual back system, so Jalen Wright could see some extra opportunities if he does get that RB2 job. Not to mention the draft capital also checks out for Jalen Wright, so I would be keeping him going into year 2. Let's move on to our next running back. That is going to be Audric Estime for the Denver Broncos. Estime had some streaming value towards the end of the year this year, but he never really got the backfield turned over to him, which did make this a messy 3-headed committee there in Denver with Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin. Now, Javonte Williams, he is scheduled to become an unrestricted free agent this offseason. That would leave the backfield projected to be Audric Estime and Jaleel McLaughlin, at least pre-NFL draft. And although I don't know if Estime will have the chance to go into week 1 as the starter for Denver, I've never really been a firm believer in him as a talent, but there should at least be a chance at some added opportunities here going into year 2 if Denver decides to address some other positions and doesn't prioritize the running back room. So because of that, I'd be holding Audric Estime for now. So what about Ray Davis of the Buffalo Bills? This is another player who showed some flashes as a rookie. He produced 6 top 25 performances at the running back position, even while splitting work with Ty Johnson at times behind starting running back James Cook. Now, even though James Cook isn't going anywhere, Ty Johnson is scheduled to hit free agency this offseason, and I think that Davis should have more than enough talent to move forward with him as the running back 2 behind Cook. That said, I do think he is the primary handcuff to James Cook going into 2025, and he would be a very high upside handcuff at that if anything were ever to happen to James Cook, so I'm very easily going to be keeping Ray Davis going into 2025. Let's talk about MarShawn Lloyd of the Green Bay Packers. This is another player that I'm keeping. He was one of my favorite running backs coming into the 2024 draft class, and I did feel like the fit in Green Bay was a really nice one behind Josh Jacobs. Unfortunately, MarShawn Lloyd spent the majority of his year on IR. He was battling a lot of injuries, so we never really got to see him hit the field, so there isn't a lot of performance takeaways from MarShawn Lloyd, but I do still believe that he's going to be a good complement to Josh Jacobs next year when he's healthy again. Going into year 2, I'm looking at him as the handcuff to Josh Jacobs. Both Emmanuel Wilson and AJ Dillon are free agents this offseason, so they are scheduled to hit the open market. Maybe one of them comes back, maybe both of them come back. It doesn't really matter to me. MarShawn Lloyd is the most talented running back behind Josh Jacobs, so to me, he's a keep as the handcuff to Josh Jacobs next year. Let's go over to Los Angeles, talk about Kimani Vidal, another favorite of the Dynasty fantasy football community. This might make people a little bit upset. I think he could be a drop going into the offseason. A lot of people liked the idea of Kimani Vidal going into the year, considering he was competing with 2 guys that really were coming off of injuries in both J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. However, J.K. Dobbins played really well this year, and he likely has earned an extension coming into the offseason. And even though Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins both dealt with injuries this year that landed them on short IR stints, you never really saw Vidal get involved that much in LA. It really just seemed like Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh wanted to bell cow one of those guys, and Kimani Vidal was not that guy for them for whatever reason. Now, like I said, I'm a little bit on the fence still with Vidal in terms of keeping or dropping, but with a strong running back class coming in the 2025 draft class and JK's play in 2024, I think if you need the roster space, you can probably drop Kimani Vidal. Let's talk about Isaiah Davis for the New York Jets. This is another player that performed in a short period of time this year. He had a 2-week stretch in 2024 where he posted RB2 numbers, and that was during a time where Breece Hall was banged up. Now, a lot of his value in those 2 weeks did come from him finding the end zone, which is tough to predict from year to year. And the reality of the situation is he still worked as the running back 3 for the majority of the year, and even in the 2 games where he was fantasy relevant, he didn't ever see more than a 50-50 split of the workload there in New York. Although I'm kind of on the fence with him too, just because he did show us a 2-week flash in the pan, I do think this is a player that if you do need roster space, you probably could consider dropping him. I don't know if he's ever going to overcome Braylon Allen and Breece Hall in this backfield, so to me, if you need the space, you can probably drop him. And now my final running back we'll talk about that I'm on the fence about. Let's talk about Will Shipley of the Philadelphia Eagles. This is a player who barely played any snaps in 2024. He only saw a total of 65 snaps on the entire season. To put that into perspective, Kenny Gainwell saw 294 snaps, which was still almost 450 less than Saquon Barkley. So that said, it's very easy to see that Will Shipley was not a part of the game plan in 2024. However, Kenneth Gainwell is a free agent going into the offseason. There is a slight chance that Philly decides to move on from him, which would make Shipley the de facto RB2 behind Saquon. And like I said, I'm on the fence. I did like Shipley more than Vidal and Davis coming out of college, so I probably want to hold on to him in the off chance that Gainwell does leave. But if you need to get rid of him, I don't blame you. He didn't do anything to show us that he's worth keeping at this time, and I definitely understand an argument if you do need to drop him. And now that we've talked about the running backs I'm on the fence about, let's talk about the easy drops. All of these players, Carson Steele, yes, I know how much people love him off of the football field. That guy's a fullback, man. We can drop him. Ali, Dylan Luabe, Sione Vaki, all of these guys. I think all of these guys are safe drops at the running back position. If you need to make the roster space, I wouldn't even double think any of these guys. All of them are very safely dropped in my fantasy football leagues. All right, so there you have it. There are 60 plus players that you can reconsider dropping or keeping going into the offseason, with a little bit of my thoughts and feelings on each of those guys going into the 2025 year. But I know it's not going to be the same for everybody. So if you disagree with something, if you do agree with something, however you feel, let me know in the comments down below. Interested to hear your thoughts and your comments down below and have some conversations with you guys. If you did enjoy the video, do me the favor, hit that like button, make sure you go hit the subscribe button, and make sure you go join our free Discord. We do have a free Discord linked in the description, helping you guys with your Dynasty fantasy football teams all year round, hoping you guys can win your fantasy football offseason offseason, which will hopefully lead to some more championships in 2025. That said, I have nothing else for you guys today, so I will see you guys on our next episode. But until then, peace out.